Finley to throw. Over the middle, intercepted. Wolford again. Wolford the other way at the 30, the 40. Wolford to midfield. Miles Wolford with the pick. The Heels on the doorstep of an enormous victory. Williams is the running back next to Howe. Play action. Howe will now lob it down the near side. Newsom with a man all over him. Pins the ball against the back of the defender and brings it in. Heels can get a first down at the 3. Now, one fake to the right. Now he's going to run to the left. Now at the 5. Takes the shot. Pinballing off the chains for the touchdown. Sam Howe showing the toughness for 6. Cardinals down 4, 35-31. May has the shotgun snap. Pressure coming. Rolls to the right. Throws to the end zone. Touchdown! Touchdown, Antoine Green! 16 seconds to go. No flag. Snapping it off the 8-yard line. May pulls it, tries to roll to the mark. Now he's going to throw it and score! Christian May throws it to Paystor in the end zone for the touchdown! They are going to play for left-handed. Was rolling out on the run and threw it left-handed. Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio, he's going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
Hey guys, and welcome to another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, here with you guys as always, coming at you on a Saturday night. Want to apologize for the late start to the podcast. Had some technical issues on my end, but we got them all worked out, and now we are ready to go to talk about ACC Kickoff from a Tar Heel perspective. Tar Heels were in town in Charlotte on a Friday to talk about all things involving last season and this upcoming season. Plenty of different sound bites that we're going to play for you here on tonight's edition of the podcast. And also got to talk about the lack of buzz around the Tar Heels this year as opposed to last year, where last year they were the talk of the town. This year, not nearly the same amount of buzz, and a lot of people not looking at them as one of the teams with a lot of upside in the ACC for this upcoming season. So we'll talk about that. But as I mentioned, we have plenty of sound bites from head coach Bill Belichick. We've also got at least one soundbite from every single player, from all the different players that were there. You had Christo Kelly, Jordan Shipp, and Milcard Abujide. So we'll hear from all of those guys here before we get out of this edition of the podcast. But, you know, first of all, we were there. You know, we got to meet up with some other Tar Heel podcasts that were there as well. That was really cool seeing the guys from the Tar Pit podcast, the Heel Brothers podcast, and everything like that. You know, what did you make of the event, and you know, really just the you know, the lack of buzz that we had around the Tar Heels overall heading into this event as opposed to last year?
Well, it's one of my favorite things we get to do as part of our job. It's one of the things that kind of really signals that, you know, our season is here. That football season is pretty much here. And we're getting closer to having something to look forward to on the weekends, which is watching college football. And it was really cool getting to finally meet guys from the Tar Pit and the Heel Brothers podcast as well. The program went 4-8 last year. Shouldn't be surprised by the lack of buzz. And it's probably a good thing for them that it was a much more quiet event as compared to last year, because if you were watching Get Up at all on Friday morning while they were kind of preparing for Belichick's second appearance, it wasn't a lot of positive things being said from the national media, like Heather Dinich, like Paul Feinbaum, and others. The vibe I got from I was in the room for their stuff at the podium. And then, of course, I was there. I was at Melcard's session in the breakout room. I think there's a quiet confidence that they're going to be better. I don't know what that looks like in terms of wins and losses. I'd love to think that they can find a way to get to a bowl game but I think they know they're not going to be as non-competitive as they were at different points in the season last year. And that's because this program is in a much better spot this time around as opposed to last year. Biggest reason why is the elimination of the spring transfer portal that just completely rocked Carolina's roster last offseason. You no longer have to deal with that. And so Carolina knew when at the end of January who their team was going to be. Makes it a whole lot easier to plan and outline moving forward kind of for the upcoming year. So I'm really the more that we hear about this team, the more that I look at this team, the more that we break down this roster, I'm starting to get a little bit quiet confidence that they're at least going to be a lot more competitive, a lot more entertaining to watch. And I think between the head coach and the three players that were in Charlotte yesterday, they kind of echoed that during their day at the podium, in the breakout room, and their other various media responsibilities.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of reasons why you would believe that, but I think the messaging is that they are way ahead of where they were a year ago, as opposed to this time last year where, if they were being honest with us when they came to Charlotte last year, they probably would have said, hey, we're not where we need to be going into the season opener against TCU, really just even going into fall camp. We're not going to be nearly where we need to be prepared to step onto the field and play at a competitive rate. And I think, some of the stuff that was revealed, which we'll get to here in a little bit, really shows you why they weren't that competitive a year ago, early in the season. And it shows you why it took them a little bit of time to get their footing. And eventually they were able to build on last year. One soundbite that I didn't have in there, just because I know that these sound bites that I do have in there are going to take us a little bit to get through, was Jordan Shipp saying, hey, we're just trying to flush everything that happened last year. Even though there were some positives that took place towards the end of the year, we're really trying to put that all behind us. And I think, honestly, that's probably the best avenue for them to go. I saw people toying around with this a little bit on social media. I think it was our guy, It's Coach Steve, that put it on there. Who does the Keenan Corner podcast from time to time. And he was saying how, when you look at it, really what last year was year zero. Now, they weren't going to tell you that right out at any point during last season. But I think afterwards, it would have been something that you could have heard from that staff was that, hey, this was year zero. We came in, we were way behind. As much as we believe, whether or not we believe that as an excuse, I think there were other schools throughout the country that have dealt with similar stuff over their time and have been far more competitive than Carolina was last year, just in the last handful of years with the transfer portal. But it is what it is. I still believe that, last year that there probably should have been the messaging that we are behind where we need to be. And this is going to be a really rough year for Carolina. And so maybe last year was just a complete throwaway year. Maybe you just have to throw that away and say, hey, we're just going to forget about it. We're going to focus on this year. And now this becomes year one of the Bill Belichick era. I know that's concerning, especially with his age, but I think that's probably some of the messaging that you heard based off of some of the stuff that we were hearing out there. I mean, is that fair to say based off of some of the stuff that we were hearing out there from Belichick and from the players?
I read Noah Weiskopf's article from Target 24/7 today, and kind of his article alluded to why Carolina feels different this year at ACC Kickoff as opposed to last year at ACC Kickoff. To put things into perspective, the guy that would take the first snap of the TCU game, Gio Lopez, Bill Belichick had not seen him take a snap in person ever.
Right.
Like, just think about that. The guy that was Carolina's starting quarterback when they opened the season and he was the starter for the majority of the year last year, Bill Belichick had never watched him take a snap in person, whether in live gameplay or in practice. It wasn't just the quarterback that it was that way with. It felt like the majority of the roster here. And so when you kind of think about that, I do think that it was hard to expect big things right off the bat, right? And that there was going to be a building process to get where ultimately we want to get to under Bill Belichick. And look, he was hired to elevate this program above where Mac Brown got it to, above where Larry Fedora's taken this program to. Like, Carolina has made the financial investment into football to win at the highest level. And when you look at other schools like Indiana, for instance, and what Kurt Cignetti did, it's very easy to be jealous of that success, but you're comparing apples and oranges. You're comparing an established college coach who had a feel for the players that he was recruiting in the transfer portal. That wasn't the case last year when Belichick built the roster, when Michael Lombardi built the roster. I do think they're a lot more comfortable now. That's the word I think I've used the most when I've watched Belichick, observed Belichick. He just looks a lot more comfortable being a college football coach. It doesn't feel as awkward. It's still kind of breathtaking when you see him walking around yesterday with the Carolina folks, but he feels a lot more comfortable, like he's found his footing, understand the rhythm of how the college season goes, how a college offseason goes, and everything that goes into running a major college football program. And so it may not be what we want to hear because we moved off of Mac Brown to try to start winning big right away. But we know internally, man, this was always the plan. This was a slow build. They were going to build this thing pretty much from the ground up. And you know, it's easy for us to want to rush that process, but I do think they have a plan. They're trying to execute that plan. We just have to kind of experience the plan as it unfolds, and ultimately we'll see if it's ultimately good enough in a year or two from now.
Yeah, look, I first of all, you brought up Indiana. That's not even a remote comparison, because with Indiana, you're talking about the biggest alumni base in all of college athletics, and you're talking about an incredibly rich donor, one that is pouring as much money as he possibly can into that program in Mark Cuban. Carolina doesn't have that. Carolina doesn't have that, will never have that, more than likely, with their program, because at this point, I am done believing that Michael Jordan is going to pour that much money into the program. Carolina's got a decent alumni base, but it's not as big as Indiana's. So that's not necessarily an apt comparison. And also, we can just admit at this point that you're never going to see anything like that in Indiana, what we saw at Indiana. Kirk Cignetti is just a really special head coach, and that's okay to admit. It sucks because Carolina was a team that could have had him as their head coach. Now, I don't know if Carolina is in the same spot as where Indiana was last year, but we heard that when we talked to Andrew Jones, that Kirk Cignetti was a guy that Carolina was talking to and was considering hiring as their head coach. So that certainly is something that we would look back on and looked at one of those missed opportunities. The people that I look at is, you look at Jay Dickert last year at Wake Forest, hired after Bill Belichick, and they have far more success. And I get it. You mentioned that he was a guy that wasn't at the college level, so he didn't have the relationships like Jake Dickert had with Washington State players. Still, Jake Dickert won 9 games last year, and they scrambled and put together a really solid roster that allowed them to compete in the ACC, compete in every game that they played throughout the season. So that would be one pushback. The other one that I think is even more apt to use as a comparison would be Bill O'Brien when he was hired by Boston College. Remember that when he comes back, and yeah, he did have some relationships with some Alabama players, but he was coming from being the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach in New England the year before. But when he gets hired at Boston College, he doesn't get hired until February 9th of 2024. And you look back at their first year, and that team was 7-6. They end up making a bowl game. And that was a team that throughout the year, you look at their losses. I mean, yeah, there were some games where they weren't necessarily competitive. The only real one that I can find just looking at it is the game against Virginia Tech. They looked like a competent group, including winning the first game of the season against Florida State, conveniently enough, in Dublin in the Aer Lingus Classic. So that would be my pushback, and that's why you can't use last year as an excuse. That's why I still think that we should be mad about how last year went. But now we got to put that all behind us and focus on this upcoming season. And so let's get to the audio from media days yesterday. Bill Belichick talking to the media. And, when you look back at what set Carolina behind a year ago, the reasons why they weren't where they needed to be, he talked about some of those reasons, including the team not being able to hold summer practices, summer player-led practices, because they just didn't have enough guys on the roster that knew what to do.
Well, again, the biggest thing last year was just how behind we were, very behind in the recruiting. All the players had signed in December, so we're picking up leftovers there. We're picking up leftovers on the portal. And we've got a few guys like Melcar would be a good example there, but we didn't really have much of an opportunity there. And then the spring portal was where we got some decent players, but they were some of them didn't get here until the summer. They weren't able to get into school until then, and so it was just so much newness, just so many new players, new coaching staff, which that wasn't that big of a problem. I mean, that's just what it is. But this year we have much more continuity. And even though we have a lot of new players, they were here in January and with us all through the spring in our off-season training program, which we didn't have last year. So that was really the biggest issue last year, was how new everything was, and how, as I said, we couldn't have player-run practices because we don't know how to run them. We don't even know the plays. So it's kind of a lot different this year.
I liken this to when Mac Brown told us after the 2021 season that he knew his team wasn't prepared going into the year. He knew it was going to be a tough year for them. This is news that we would have loved to hear last year, but I understand why you can't throw that out there, because you don't want to basically throw your players under the bus and say that we know this isn't going to be a successful year. But they knew. They knew when you couldn't have player-led practices in the summer, you're basically taking that time off. I mean, guys are probably still working out, but you're taking all that time off from doing football activities. I mean, that puts you way behind the eight ball in terms of being able to be successful on the field this upcoming season. Remember that you go back to Mac Brown talking about some of the quarterback battles. That's where they figured out that Sam Howell was their starting quarterback. That's where they knew that everything that they had seen in the spring from Drake May was going to carry over, and they could name him the starting quarterback without doing it to the media when they got into fall camp. I think that right there was probably the most revealing thing that they said yesterday, and shows us exactly why they weren't able to be successful last season, and why maybe the approach that they took, especially at the quarterback position last year, might not have been the most successful one.
Yeah, I mean, we hear player-led. That's the buzzword. The best teams are player-led. Those are the guys that are going to set the tone for your culture on a week in, week out basis, really a day in, day out basis. Well, it's hard to establish that culture when the dudes that you expect to be your leaders just from the positions that they play, if they're not there. Like, that's the biggest difference, is these guys couldn't establish themselves as leaders when the coaches weren't around because they weren't on campus yet. And that's the biggest difference now, where he said, the majority of this year's roster has been on campus since January. And they've been able to go through the off-season conditioning program, go through spring practice. And we're sitting here now in the summer, and, we heard from the guys yesterday, they're having these player-led practices. And there's consequences for guys that if they don't do what they're being asked to do. And it doesn't guarantee you anything. in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to win more games, but it does give you a better chance because you're no longer behind the 8 ball. Just think about how far behind Carolina was to TCU when they walked on that field that Monday night compared to where TCU was and is compared to where Carolina was. That's not going to be the case this time around. They're probably going to be similar to equal footing. TCU may have more talent, and you might believe more in Sonny Dykes as a college football coach. And we'll talk more about as we get closer and closer to that opener. But all the other stuff is kind of equal now. And now these guys have gone through the offseason conditioning program. They've been at practice under Bill Belichick. They've been at practice when he isn't there. And so it doesn't guarantee anything. It doesn't mean that we're going to win more games. But if Carolina is more competitive and they look closer to being like the type of team we want to be and that we expect to be, we can look back and say the summer and having everything established going back to January really did give this roster a fighting chance to be the type of team we're striving to be here.
Might be the team in the country that benefited the most from not having the spring portal. I think there are a lot of teams that benefit from that, and I think it was very smart of the people around college football to make sure that that was the case this upcoming season. But this team needed to have continuity from the spring into the summer and into the fall. And I think that's what you've got this year. They didn't have that last year. And he's right. There were a lot of major contributors a year ago, guys that they were looking at to be leaders on this team that were not a part of this group until they stepped into fall camp. And I think one thing that people would say, well, why couldn't you do summer practices? There were still some guys that were left over. Well, last year, we heard how they were focusing on a lot of the fundamentals. They didn't really know the playbook. And then you don't have a quarterback on the roster because you let Ryan Brown walk. The only guy you had that knew really anything about the playbook that they were wanting to run was Bryce Baker. That's really a tough situation for a guy that is a true freshman to have to go out there and try to get guys to line up and do the things that they need to do, especially teaching guys that are still coming in from the spring transfer portal, trying to teach those guys exactly what to do. And so I think there just wasn't the understanding that there needed to be of the playbook a year ago in the summer. There weren't really the amount of bodies that they even needed to be able to practice up against each other during the summer. And so it just put them way behind. And so, yeah, that honestly, you go back to that season opener against TCU, and that first drive must have just been, an enigma for some of these guys. How in the world did we just do that? How did we drive right down the field and score a touchdown on this team after not having a summer where we were actually practicing? And, to them, and probably, even a little bit to us in the stands, we were wondering, is it really going to be this easy? And quickly you learn that was not going to be the case. This year, I think this team is humbled. They're in a much different spot. But I do think that this is amazing. The difference this year as opposed to where they were last year. I think when they take the field against TCU, you will see a team that is in a much different spot that will look much more together, will look like they understand a lot more things this year. And so that's going to go a long way for this team this upcoming year, as opposed to last year where I think it became very obvious to us in that first game that this team was out of sorts. They weren't where they needed to be. And we probably should have realized that it was going to be a really rough year right out of the gate. But, we thought, hey, with Bill Belichick as your head coach, things will get ironed out and things will get better as the year goes along. Doesn't matter when you don't have those summer-led practices that, as I said, we learned if you didn't know before, we learned from Mac Brown just how important those summer-led practices were. All right, we move on to Bill Belichick. Talking about Bobby Petrino, bringing him in. and what the offense is going to look like. I found this soundbite really interesting.
Bobby's offense is similar to what we did in New England. We kind of merged those two together, but in the spring, really, it's a lot of teaching and installation. So, we haven't really gotten into competitive situations like we would in games and so forth. A lot of it's just, installing basic fundamentals, basic techniques, basic plays, rather than try to out-scheme each other on offense and defense. We're just trying to, learn how to be a good fundamental team. So we'll see how all that plays out. But certainly he's had a ton of experience of doing that, whether it be at Arkansas or Louisville, the place he's been, Atlanta, and so forth. I have a ton of respect for him. I've been doing it a long time. He's an excellent teacher. He brings a lot of confidence to the offense and a very balanced attack. We saw that in the spring that, you got to defend everything with him. So that's been challenging for us defensively.
So the most interesting thing that I think he says there is he points out that, hey, this is going to be a blend of Bobby's offense and what we did in New England. So people that are wondering just how involved Bill Belichick is going to be on that side of the ball, maybe wondered how involved Bill Belichick was on that side of the ball a year ago, I would think that there was some involvement from Bill. That scares me a little bit. I'm not going to lie, because of how bad the offense looked last year. And I do think that with Bill Belichick, there needs to be a lot of trust in Bobby Petrino to be able to do the things that he needs to do. But I do trust that Bobby Petrino is just a guy whose offense is much more creative, much more adept to succeed at the college level than what we saw from Freddie Kitchens.
Yeah, I think whenever he talks about using what he does and what they did in New England, I think it's more of maybe some of the formation stuff. We talked about how New England was ahead of the curve, with their 12 personnel, putting 2 tight ends on the field, and how explosive their offense was in certain formations. We talked about how this tight end room maybe does lend them to lean on them, especially early on in the year. And then maybe some of the short passing game principles, because it was an offense that could move the ball up and down the field without ever having to get the ball vertically. Now, I think in college they're going to have to be able to push it down the field. And with Brady, you always had that threat of him beating you over the top, but they really did a lot of their stuff underneath. I don't think Bobby Petrino would be here if he couldn't run his offense the way that he sees fit. Now, maybe Belichick wants him to not run as much tempo and be a little bit more deliberate in how they manage the pace in which they run their offense. But I don't have a lot of concerns of Belichick getting on the headset and telling him what play to run or who to put him in from a personnel standpoint. If we get to that and it's an issue, we'll obviously have to address it. At this point in his career, I don't think Bobby Petrino would be coaching here if he couldn't just coach the way he is coached, because for all of his issues off the field at different times, when he's been tasked with putting together a pretty good offense, he's done that at a multitude of different stops in college, did so in the NFL. And I'm not saying that Carolina is going to be a top offensive team in the ACC this year. They will be marginally improved, and they will be better coached. They will be better prepared. They will be able to make changes on the fly. They'll be able to make changes as a game moves along, as a season moves along, and those were things that just simply weren't the case last year with Freddie Kitchens and co.
Yeah, I think one thing that you give Bobby credit for is I feel like he's going to be much better at adjusting in game. And it's not going to be, hey, we're running our offense. We're doing exactly what we scripted out. And that's just going to be it. And I think, you go back to some of the starts that Carolina had to games last year. I mean, especially that TCU game. And it was very obvious that Carolina was set up to be able to succeed out of the gate. It was how long would they be able to succeed before, defenses adjusted, and Carolina just simply had no sort of adjustment to what they were doing. I think we saw that throughout the year from Freddie Kitchens. And, I think the other thing is that, as we've talked about, Bobby Petrino, Bill Belichick, whatever principles are being used, I think this offense is going to be able to adjust to the personnel that it has much better this year. Bobby Petrino is going to be calling the offense. So I think that he's going to be the guy that's going to adjust to his personnel a lot better than a guy like Freddie Kitchens did last year, which never seemed to, we saw it. The offense never adjusted to the personnel that they had a year ago. Most of the guys, it felt like you were trying to fit a round peg in a square hole. It just never really seemed to work with a lot of those guys. Made you wonder why Carolina went out and got certain guys. But I think this year it's much more organized. It feels like Bobby Petrino has guys that fit exactly what he's looking for as an offensive coordinator. And if they don't, then he's going to adjust to what their strengths are. He's going to make the offense mold around them and really play to their strengths, which I think is going to allow Carolina to succeed a lot more. We're getting comments. Tarpit 9 says Austin Blaskey's dad said in a forum, apparently at some point during this offseason, that it was Kitchens calling plays last year was all his offense. So, I hope that definitely is the case because, with Bill Belichick, I love that he wants to be involved on the defensive side of the football. Bill Belichick is one of the best defensive minds that we have ever seen in the sport of football. All you need to do is go back and look at the 2 Super Bowl rings that he won as the Giants head coach to know that, or as the Giants defensive coordinator to know that before he eventually becomes New England's coach. I think you just want him to, if there are certain principles that he is wanting to bring over from New England, certain formations, as you said, maybe that's ultimately what you're hoping he brings over, but you don't want him to be super involved in what you're doing offensively. You move on to Bill Belichick talking about, things they were able to do a little bit quicker in the spring this time around, as opposed to what they were doing last year during the spring.
Well, again, we had a lot of new players there. We had 35 freshmen and however many transfers it was. So, basically we had half the team had not been with us. So those guys got a lot of experience. We spent a lot of time on basic fundamentals, terminology, again, foundational things. And that, enabled us to move a little quicker through the spring, and it'll enable us to move a lot quicker in the fall. Last year when we started, we were literally starting from scratch. We're above that now for sure. So I'd say just the overall foundation that we have and our ability to, operate as a team, operate collectively is, that was a good foundation in the spring. Bobby on the offense, defensively we made a few adjustments. So those were, good positive steps, and then hopefully that'll give us a higher foundation to build from in the fall, and, we'll move up from that.
Yeah, foundation was another one of the big talking points of the day, was that they have a much better foundation this year built, and we heard that going into last year, that was what Carolina was attempting to build. I think they kind of failed at that, but this year they've been able to do everything that they've needed to do to build that foundation. I just like that, he's saying we're ahead of where we were this time last year on both sides of the ball. And I think going into fall camp, really being able to focus more on the battles that are taking place, focused on adding certain intricacies to what you're doing offensively and defensively, as opposed to having to completely reinstall a playbook with a new group, I think is going to go a long way for Carolina.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. They know going in what the position battles are, what the position battles look like, and they probably, in their minds, have had discussions about how they see those battles playing out. Whereas last year, you didn't have a sense of anything, because look at how many key guys they lost in the spring portal, and then he pretty much told you what they were able to kind of re-add to the roster just was nowhere near good enough to really play at the level that they play at, even at the ACC level. They were just adding bodies to add bodies, so they could pretty much conduct practices like they were going to need to. And so, it's I think that part of it is refreshing, and I think they should have a firmer grasp of how things operate. At this level as compared to as compared to the NFL level. I think that he has to love and enjoy isn't, this level, man. And it's not as much as you used to be able to. You can really be on the field and you can really be hands-on. And that's when I think he's at his best. And I think that's whenever you see the plus to having someone like him is that he loves to be on the field. He loves to be with guys one-on-one. The NFL, it's kind of limited to how much time you're actually on the field when you think about when they prepare for games. But now that he has a lot more familiarity with these guys, a lot more continuity with these guys, I think it begs to stand. We'll see a lot more in-season progression and in-season development across the board, as opposed to last year where it felt like that progress was a little bit more reduced to just a handful of players.
Well, the other thing that I think you're going to see is more continuity throughout the year. You're going to see guys that are going to keep roster spots, keep spots on the depth chart a lot easier than they did a year ago, where it seemed like last year, especially because fall camp was really the time where they were evaluating a decent amount of the roster. They carried that over into the regular season last year, where that was basically just an extension of practice where, hey, we got to use these games to evaluate these guys on the roster and really figure out who can actually contribute for us, not only this year, but going forward. So this year, I don't think you're going to have to do that. Your evaluation periods have been during the spring. In the summer, you'll get some notes from guys that are on the roster, from your leaders, guys that were there yesterday, and a few other guys that'll tell you, hey, so-and-so has made strides. This other player hasn't necessarily made the strides that he's needed to. And then in the fall camp, you'll also see that play out with some of the battles that you're going through. I think going into the year, you're going to see the offensive line. It's going to be a group of guys that they trust, and they'll probably have a little bit of a longer leash than they did a year ago. Same thing at the running back position. We talked about that last year. They rotated guys way too much at that position a year ago. I think it's because they felt like they didn't know what exactly they had. This time around, it's going to be much different, where they're going to know, hey, these are the strengths of these guys. We're going to lean on so-and-so for a little bit here, and we'll see whether or not he succeeds. If by a certain point in the season he doesn't, then yeah, of course, we're going to look at some of the other guys on the roster. And I think that's one thing that Bill Belichick is not afraid to do, that we've seen other coaches in Carolina history a little afraid to do, is he's not afraid to turn over a position to somebody else, because he's not somebody that's based on loyalty. It's what you produce on the field. So I think in that respect, you're going to see a much different team this year on the field. And so that's what having this extra time, having the continuity of being there in spring and coming back in the fall, I think is going to allow them to do this season. One other thing that I thought was interesting in there was he mentioned the new players that were there last year, 35 new players. I think that was when they took the field in fall camp. And he continues to hammer that. And really, that's the thing. Even when he's asked about what he personally learned about himself last year, some of the areas that he needs to get better, he really does point back to the fact that there was so much newness, which I don't know if that's necessarily him taking accountability for last year. Somebody else asked him a similar question when he's up on the podium, and here was his response.
Coach Belichick, last year was a bit of a struggle, to say the least, there. And when you look at what happened in its totality, what were things that you took away and you learned as a college coach that you might not have been aware of, or you might not have been expecting coming into this thing, that you go into year two with and say, all right, we'll be better in this way because I've experienced this and I know these pitfalls?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just the relationships and, building, with all the people that are involved in the school, whether it's, academics, compliance, different training, the training things that we have to, go through, the hourly schedule and so forth that, we have to be in compliance with, things like that. And the different people that we're working with, we brought in some people that I was familiar with, but, also, again, multiple other people, in the university, great people that have really done a great job of supporting us, but, you just need to build that working relationship with. And so that's been good. It's been fun. And I appreciate the work that they've done. We'll work a lot more efficiently as we spend more time together and, get to know each other better and understand the needs and what's most helpful. But they've been great.
So, yeah, basically he says that the most important thing that he's learned is that, he has to adjust to life on campus and the relationships that he has on campus, as opposed to saying that there were things that he learned about the college game. I mean, he was asked that multiple times throughout the day and never really said that he learned, the college game was more difficult. He learned certain elements of the college game that he needs to be better at. The main thing that I want to get at here is, do you think he's taking enough accountability on himself for what happened last year? Or does it feel like he continues to point the finger at the players and the lack of talent and really the poor setup that was there last year?
I don't really know what else more you expect him to say, to be honest with you. What was that? Mac Brown always said football is a simple game. It's complicated by men. Yeah, it's a different game than what it comes down to from how it's played at the NFL level. But some of the aspects were just why they weren't very good. They didn't block very well, didn't tackle very well, couldn't run the ball, weren't good on third down. I mean, if he just sat up there and said that 12 times, we get pissed off about that. I also think the relationships across campus, they do matter. Because when you're in the NFL, you answer to two people. You answer to the owner and the GM. When he was in New England, he pretty much had to answer to Robert Kraft. Whereas in college, look at how many people you have to make sure are pulling in the same direction as you are. You got to have a functioning relationship with the chancellor, with the AD, with the board of trustees, with the academic people that are involved with your program. There's a lot. And so I could only imagine how many headaches he ran into when stuff was being reported, let's say the week of the Cal game, that he may be fired, which Jordan Shipp, very strongly said there was a lot of fake stuff that was written about him. And there was a lot of stuff that was written to try to tear him down and tear the team down because no one wanted to see Carolina win. So I don't want to underestimate what he talks about building and establishing those relationships. I don't think it's a coincidence that you saw him at, let's say, Michael Malone's introductory press conference when he was introduced as the basketball head coach. You saw him pop up at baseball games. You saw him pop up at some other events where he probably doesn't want to be there, but he understands the value in terms of having everybody pulling in the same direction as he's trying to build a program that everyone at Carolina can and will be proud of. When it comes to diminishing the talent, he's not lying. Like, when you look at the roster top to bottom, that was a roster that was more alike to the last 2 years of Larry Fedora than what we saw under Mac Brown, where Carolina had a much more surplus of talent, maybe didn't maximize it. So I didn't get annoyed by that answer because at this point, I really don't know what you expect him to say.
Well, that he picked terrible players. I mean, he was part of the reason that this roster was where it was last year. You were the guy that was helping handpick these guys. So for you to continue to focus on just the players really being the issue and not taking much accountability in his own right, I think is something that is notable. For me, I'd like to see him say that, hey, this level was a lot different than I expected it to be. There are areas that I need to clean up and I need to be a lot better in this upcoming season. Even if he doesn't believe it, even just saying that, I think would be something that you like to hear from him, because I think right now, when you just put it all on the players, it's not the best look, man. It's not going to get a lot of guys throughout college football to ultimately want to come and play for you, because they're going to look at you as somebody that, hey, if you fail there, it's going to be put on your shoulders as you're the only reason why it wasn't successful. I would like him to come out and say, I made a mistake hiring Freddie Kitchens as my offensive coordinator, because I think we're all thinking it. We all know that's the case. That was one of the biggest mistakes he made. So that's something that I would like to see from him. Just a little more accountability. You've had guys that have been on campus at Carolina that have always seemed to put the blame on themselves. Especially you go back to, Roy Williams. Hubert Davis was like that a lot himself as well, where he would take those guys would take the blame themselves for what ultimately happened. I just haven't heard enough this offseason from Bill Belichick that last year was on me. It feels like it's being pushed to the other guys, particularly the players that were on last year's roster, when you were the guy that helped put that roster together. You can blame Michael Lombardi for it as well, and I think he deserves a fair amount of the blame. I don't think he's the guy that's going to set Carolina up for a ton of success based on the issues that he had picking talent even when he was at the NFL level. There's a reason he didn't stay there Bill Belichick's entire time, and there's a reason why he was on television as opposed to being in another GM job. But I just, for me, I think more accountability from the Bill Belichick side of things would be nice to hear. We move on. Let's go to him talking about building through the high school ranks, why he chose that path as opposed to building through the transfer portal.
We'll see. Yeah, I can't measure. I don't know what the future is going to look like. We'll see how quickly things come along. But in all honesty, we didn't really have any choice. There wasn't a team when we got here. We had 3 defensive linemen. It would have been impossible to practice. So we did bring in a lot of young players. There was really 2 recruiting classes. The 40 players were this year and last year. I would expect next year's class, the 27 class, to be, in the low 20s, somewhere in there. So like about half that size. But yeah, that in order to build a foundation of the team, that's what we had to do. So is that the ideal way to do it? I don't know, but I thought that was our best option, and I'm glad we did it that way. These guys they're going to become good players. They're young.
Yeah, and I think one thing that you have to acknowledge is that nobody's concerned about these guys eventually becoming big players. I think the thing that people are worried about is that if this was a younger coach that was building this way, it would make a lot more sense. It's that Bill Belichick is older. We don't know exactly how long he's going to be here, and so we don't know how long the window is open for Carolina to be able to win with him. What do you think, as we sit here now, the strategy that he took this offseason of building through the high school ranks as opposed to building through the transfer portal?
I think what they tried to do, and we just got done previewing the offensive line, let's say, for our position previews, and they brought in was a 7 true freshmen in that position group. I think they wanted to find the base structure, the foundation of what their roster will be over the next 3 to 4 years. As much as we can sit here and say it's hard to go that way because of Belichick's age and his timeline, the bigger uncertainty is because of the portal. Are these guys going to be here for you to even reap the rewards of building that way? But I understand what they are trying to do, which is let's get the foundation of our roster through high school recruiting. We can grow, develop these guys. By the time they're probably, sophomores, more likely juniors, they'll be ready to be impactful players. And then we can supplement the roster via the transfer portal in ways that they probably haven't done so far this first 2 cycles. They've been able to get some good players. They haven't necessarily been the big the heavy hitters that I thought they were going to be from the time that he got hired. Regardless, you're taking a risk, because if, let's just say, these guys that you were able to they're able to commit to you coming out of high school, well, let's say that school that you beat them out for comes back to them with more money or more playing time as sophomores. There's no guarantee these guys are staying committed. And we're pro player guys. I don't get upset when guys leave for more money. I don't leave when guys leave for more playing time. So that's why I said, when it comes to that aspect of, we have to wait and see. And he's having to wait and see. He believes in what he's doing because, that's he has to do that as a head coach. I think he'd love to have a program that looks like what Clemson has in terms of their retention rate. in just terms of being able to keep guys here and develop them and then add via the transfer portal. We just have to wait and see if that's possible. If it is, I do think they will be able to build to a point where they're going to have a really solid foundation on both sides. And then they can go get, whether it's a wide receiver, whether it's that pass rusher, maybe it's even a quarterback, they go get that player via the portal. But I see the vision. It's just, regardless of it, it's a risk, because you never know in this day and age how long these players are going to stay committed to your program when they come out of high school.
Yeah, and I think, there are going to be a decent amount of guys that are going to stay committed to Carolina that are not going to necessarily hit the transfer portal after this 1 year. Because, you look at the depth chart right now, and there aren't a lot of freshmen that are popping up in the 2 deep just yet. Even with all the guys that Carolina is bringing in from last year, there are a lot of guys that are out of the portal or that are holdovers from a year ago that are still ahead of them on the depth chart. I think that it's smart for him to build this way, and it's the best thing, I think, for Carolina in the long term. But in the short term, I don't know that it's the best thing for him. And with the thing that I talked about, not only do you have his age that's a factor, you do have the fact that there are people that are saying, hey, this is an important year for him. He's got to be able to win some games here and reinstill confidence in the fact that this was the right plan for Carolina to go with, or else this could be over after this year. So I do get where he's going. I do understand why he thinks this is the right way to build, but it ultimately could come back to bite him in the end. And I'm hoping that's not what ends up happening. I'm hoping these guys succeed this year. Carolina, wins 6-7 games, somewhere in that range, maybe even more than that, in a surprising season. And all of a sudden we're saying, hey, things are on track. I just don't know how realistic that is with the guys where they're at. And another reason why I think they may have had to do this is because I don't know if they have enough money to be able to compete with some of the top schools that are going out and getting these guys in the transfer portal. I know there's more money there, but is it where it needs to be? I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I think that Carolina's in a decent spot economically, but I don't think that they're nearly in the spot that they thought they were going to be in when they quote unquote went all in last year with this hire. And so I think that's definitely part of it. With that, they haven't been able to attract some of the big names. I think we thought that when Bill Belichick came in, that his name was going to carry a lot of weight with guys in the transfer portal. And there were going to be guys that said, hey, I do want to play for the greatest coach of all time. We heard that from a guy like Christo Kelly, but I think we thought there were other big names that were going to think that as well. It doesn't trump what other schools can offer you monetarily. And I think we've learned that here over the past few years, but especially over the past year, that it doesn't mean anything unless you have the money to be able to back it up. So I'm interested to see, do we get more reports about where Carolina is at in terms of the money and being able to compete with other schools? And maybe, we'll see that change, where if Carolina can win games on the field, maybe we will see more money pour into the program, and that will allow Carolina to be able to go out and get some of these big names in the transfer portal. And maybe that's the strategy they decide to take going into a year like 2027, where they ultimately hope that they'll be more competitive. All right, 2 more quick ones from Bill Belichick here. I'm not going to give you nearly as much reaction to this. This was one that I think people were reading a lot into yesterday, but when I heard it a little bit differently than when you see it written. Here's him talking about the quarterback position and where things stand.
Yeah, well, Torrey's healthy. Travis participated in spring ball on a limited basis, but he's had a good, follow-up at the end of the spring and the summer workouts, so he's doing fine. Billy was one of the top passers in the Big Ten 2 years ago. Got injured in the first game last year, so missed the whole season. And then, Miles was one of the top recruits out of the Hunt School. Went to Texas A&M and redshirted, and then played. Was a backup last year, but this is an opportunity for him, with a clean slate, with, nobody established here as our starting quarterback, to compete with the job. So we'll see how the competition goes with all four of those guys. Like, they all have, strong points. They all have some things to offer. And we'll see how, now that they have a good spring under their belt of knowing the offense and, being comfortable with the terminology and different, options in the offense and so forth. Now we'll see how they do it with competition, training camp, and then into the season. So I'm excited to see how they all do.
Is there a leader in that job battle, or is it really up to all four?
Yeah. Again, we haven't played a game. Everybody's kind of gotten an equal opportunity, and we'll see how things sort out now as we get closer to the season. But there's no leader in the clubhouse right now. Everybody's out on the course.
So, yeah, a lot of people took that to mean that, hey, the quarterback battle is wide open. And I know that he said, hey, all four guys, when he was talking there, we'll see what they bring to the competition when they get into fall camp. I don't believe that the quarterback competition is wide open. I still think it's really between two guys. But what I do think is that, hey, he's basically saying, look, if Travis, if Arturi, if those guys come out and put together an amazing fall camp, then maybe they could end up being the starter for us. But more than likely, it's going to still be Billy Edwards Jr., Miles O'Neill battling to the end, and it will probably be one of those two that we'll see in Dublin.
Yeah, that's what I think is going on here. I think it's a two-horse race, but they're not going to shut the door on if another guy gives them something that they have to take a second look at. And this was kind of where we thought we were when they had the late addition of Dickens, the Western Carolina transfer, who of course now is transferred back out of the program. Won't be a Carolina football player this upcoming year. I think this is, if I had to bet, I think it's Billy Edwards Jr.'s job to lose going into at least the season opener. Followed by O'Neill, the guy I do think who will emerge as Carolina starter as the season does progress with his ability to get the football down the field. But I do think, Travis Burgess, very athletic, could really bring something to that room that maybe those two guys don't have to offer. They've liked Newkirk. We've known that because he beat out Bryce Baker last year, which was very surprising considering how highly thought of Baker was on the recruiting trail. And I think I'll kind of just stay where I was the last time we talked about the quarterback room. I think you're going to see two QBs play against TCU. I think Edwards and I think O'Neill will both play, and hopefully by the time this team gets back from Ireland, they will at least have an established quarterback, because if you have two quarterbacks, you don't have one. I don't even know if there's a saying for if you have four quarterbacks, what that means you are. So I don't think that's the case, but it will be fun to just see kind of how this thing ultimately shakes out this fall camp.
Yeah, one thing that we know about Bill Belichick is he's never going to shut the door on competition. So for him, I think by saying, hey, all four guys are in the competition, what it basically does is it allows everybody to feel like, hey, we've got a chance. We've got an opportunity going into fall camp for ourselves, and puts them in the best position to compete. So I don't think that that's true. I think there are two guys that have separated themselves, judging off of all the reports. I believe that it really is Billy Edwards Jr. and Miles O'Neill. And I would think that Billy Edwards Jr. is going to be the starter when they get to Dublin. I think he probably ends up playing that whole game. I think then, we'll see where he's at. But I think that, there is a chance that we do see two quarterbacks in that game in Ireland. I hope that's not the case. I hope they find their guy. But, like I said, I believe that the quarterback at the start of the year for Carolina will not be the quarterback that finishes the year for Carolina. I said that when we were previewing the quarterbacks, and I stick by that now. I do think that the year will start with Billy Edwards Jr. He'll get his opportunity. They're gonna give him the chance to be the guy, but I think eventually it goes over to Miles O'Neill, who I think is built to run Bobby Petrino's offense a little bit better, and I think they'll realize that as they go throughout the season. The other one that a lot of people were reacting to was this comment, which got to tell you, the second time around, or hearing this as opposed to reading it. I read it from yesterday's transcript before I listened to it earlier today. There might be something here.
Coach, when people watch this North Carolina team next season, what is the first thing you hope they take away when they step on the field?
It's the first thing that I don't know. They'll probably take away new uniforms.
Okay, so I don't know if this necessarily means that Carolina is getting a whole new uniform kit. There were people that were worried that they're not going to wear the normal or the current home and away jerseys that they've been wearing since the middle of the Larry Fedora era. I don't think you have to worry about that. But what I do think he might be hinting at is that the throwback uniforms that Carolina has previewed, they haven't given us the official uniform, but they've shown us the helmet. At least those helmets could be worn in the season opener against TCU.
Yeah, I don't think it means we're getting a whole new a new set of regular uniforms. I think he's hinting at the fact that they're going to wear the 80 throwback, at least in the season opener. I'm open to that becoming a bigger part of the rotation. We've seen that logo kind of show up on a lot more merchandise, like online. So I think you can tell that the university is kind of wanting to embrace that old secondary logo as well. I'm not against adding or getting new uniforms. I mean, I love our current uniforms now. It's kind of hard to mess up when you have that powder blue. It's really hard to mess up what the look is, even for as dreadful as the Larry Fedora era uniforms were, with how much black was involved in a lot of the lettering, even when they were wearing white. But I do think this was just a very simplistic answer referring to what they'll do in the opener, because I know TCU, I think, is wearing a special uniform for the game as well. Because by this point in the season, or by this point in the offseason, you kind of know when teams have new uniforms, because they'll usually tease it on social media. And we haven't seen anything so far that there's a new uniform coming outside of what they've done with the 1980s helmet. So, but we'll have to wait and see. Maybe, who knows? So they might run on the field 12 games and become the new Oregon Ducks, wearing 12 different uniforms every time they take the field this year.
Yeah, doubt we see that. The only other thing that I would be open to is them wearing the 90s throwbacks as their primary uniform and then having the 80s throwbacks as their secondary uniform. But again, I think you are 100% right. If they were doing that, they would have announced that earlier this offseason. I don't know if there's a special uniform that's going with the helmet. They haven't announced that officially. I think that might be something that they're holding on to before they announce that they're wearing those in the season opener. So we'll have to see. But yes, we had I had a couple of people that sent me that, a little panicked, wondering if they were changing the uniform. I don't think the primary uniforms are changing. So I don't think you have to get too bent out of shape over that. All right, let's get quickly to the student athletes. One thing that I think really stuck out was, the athletes talking about trust and how there is more trust this year. Christo Kelly laid out a specific drill that has allowed them to develop a little bit more trust on the field.
So for us, our hardest day would be when we do bouts, right? Traditionally, it's 3 sets, 2 minutes, and you're just running. It's brutal. And this past Wednesday, the skill guys, they had 5 sets of that. But 3 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute? 1 minute. Yeah, and it just breaks you to the point of, you don't know if you can go on any further. And I think training in that, being able to find comfort in that feeling, right? And then seeing guys around you who are feeling that same thing, but still pushing forward. When you see a guy who's on the point of collapsing, but he's still going, that's how you build trust, right? And that's what we're trying to get to, is that point. So, it's been, it's not always the most fun in the moment. It never is, but, I think there's a better understanding of we got to do this, right? And, when you have guys around you who are pushing themselves to their limits and then still going, it's, it's a little fun.
So I think that's another one of my big takeaways, is that the guys that are talking about that we're talking about this program, they've mentioned that trust is at a much different level than it was last year. And, you go back to those reports and you can't believe everything that came out, but there's a lot of stuff that I believe, especially from some of the sources that it was coming from, that I believe went on last year. And one thing is, I do believe that there were guys in the locker room that did not necessarily get along with each other. And I wonder if there was trust in certain guys, or if there was a belief that certain guys on the roster just weren't giving it their all, weren't putting in that effort that needed to be there on every single rep. It feels like this year, this group is in a much different spot. They trust each other at a much different rate than they did a year ago. And I think that's really big for team chemistry and really could lead to more success on the field.
It's what's possible when they've been together now for almost 7 months and didn't see 20 guys leave and 20 new guys come in halfway through it. You've been with the same group doing the same drills, doing the same workouts, doing the same things on a day-to-day basis, and you know who's going to show up. And so it's necessary, man. Like chemistry, I think a lot of people try to overrate it, but I've never overrated how important chemistry is. And it's never been harder to develop that within your locker room because of how your roster changes on a year-to-year basis as it is. We're now, I think it's a lot easier. The culture is a little bit more established. You have established leaders. Like the 3 voices we heard speak yesterday are 3 voices we expect to play at a very high level for Carolina last year. I don't know if that was the case when Carolina came to ACC Kickoff last year. You were maybe hoping a handful of those guys maybe would emerge, but there wasn't that trust that was going to happen. There's a lot of trust in Christo Kelly, even though he had the season cut short because of injury. A lot of trust in Jordan Chip, a lot of trust in Melkart Abujawdi. So when they talk, man, people listen. People are going to take what they say to heart. And so you had that example there, and Jordan Chip talked about it as well. They just feel a lot more connected. They feel more like a team as opposed to a bunch of players wearing a uniform. And I've never been one to overrate that. I'm not going to overrate that now. And that trust could be the difference between making plays late in the game in the fourth quarter against a team that they need to beat to get to a bowl game, as opposed to maybe not making those plays like they did down the stretch in losses to Wake, Duke, and NC State.
Yeah, and Tar Pit 9 mentions a couple of guys in the comments section that I think, honestly, or it's better that Carolina has moved on from those guys, or that they moved on from Carolina. The 2 Washington guys last year, it felt like had a big say in the room. And I think those were 2 guys that, honestly, people questioned, were they working at the level that they needed to work at, especially at the end of last year with Kamori House. I questioned it right here on this podcast. I didn't think he was giving it 100%. I didn't think he cared. I think he tuned out. And that was shown by the fact that he entered the transfer portal and some of the stuff that was being reported around him. So I think this year you're not going to have to worry about that. You got guys that are 100% bought in to what's going on there. It aren't as many guys that are holdovers from the Mac Brown era, but guys that have chosen to stay that are from the Mac Brown era or were recruited originally by Mac Brown. Hey, you had a chance to leave this offseason after seeing what it looked like for a year. You knew that this was what it was about. You knew that this was what Bill Belichick's system looked like, and you've had the chance to adjust. And so now I do think that a lot of those guys have made those adjustments, and if they're here for a reason. And I expect this team to be much closer this year. And yeah, as you said, team chemistry goes a long way. We've seen it with our Major League Baseball team, that team chemistry goes a long, long way. So I definitely think that's something that's going to be a lot different about this year's group. You also have guys that really just love Carolina. The 2 guys that we're going to hear from here at the end, I think really showed you, just based off of some of their comments, how much they love Carolina. Here's Jordan Chip talking about his love for the Tar Heels.
Yeah, I mean, first thing I got to do is just thank God for that. I mean, that's just the fact that somebody could call you like Mr. Carolina, like it's a joke and all and everything like that. But I mean, just the fact that like I'm even able to be looked at like that is nothing short of a blessing from God. And without him, I wouldn't be here or anything like that. So you got to start with that. Then I mean, in terms of just Mr. Carolina, like I'm from here. I live 20 minutes away. Like my high school is 15 minutes away. Like this is home. Carolina's home to me. Like there's nowhere else I wanted to go. Everybody kept asking about the portal. When I made it clear after the NC State game, there was nowhere I was going. No matter what was going on, we were going to figure out how to bring wins to Carolina because I bleed blue. That's just, it is what it is. I'm a Carolina man, Carolina guy, and that's just what I am. Go Heels through and through.
So he revealed during his the one that they had with the local media, the pre-ACC kickoff availability, that his mom, it basically serves as an agent. She was contacted before the season was over about possibly getting him to transfer. Milcard Abujade said there were multiple people that contacted him attempting to get him to transfer, but both guys decided to stick at Carolina. Talked about it a little bit with Jordan Shipp when we were talking about the wide receivers. These are two guys, if you're looking for reasons to show up to Kenan Stadium, if you're looking for guys to buy jerseys for this year, these should be two of the guys, along with a guy like Christo Kelly, but especially these two guys that had a chance to leave in the offseason based off of what they did a year ago, decided to stick it out, and just love that comment from Jordan Shipp about his love for Carolina.
Couldn't be more proud to see someone represent Carolina than I am of Jordan Shipp. I think he embodies what it means to be a Tar Heel. Not a Carolina athlete, not a Carolina football player. He's a Tar Heel. And you can see the passion and what it means to him whenever he talks about being Mr. Carolina and having that nickname. And it's not something that I think it might be a joke, but I think he takes it to heart. But I think he understands how impactful Carolina has been for him. It's not a 4-year decision; it's a 40-year decision. He's going to embody that to the absolute fullest, and it's why I'm rooting for every single one of these guys. Obviously, they're Carolina guys. I want him to have everything he wants to have, and I hope he gets to be a part of seeing this thing through, and hope he gets to be a part of going back to a bowl game or having that big upset that jumpstarts the Bill Belichick run. Like, I hope he gets those moments during his time here in Chapel Hill because he deserves it. Everyone on the roster deserves it. Everyone on the roster is working for that. But how many other guys would people in his position leave and not think twice? And we would have been upset had he left, would have also understood why he left. Because disappointing season, right? Didn't have the production that we could have envisioned him having, so on and so forth. He stayed. That shows a lot about not who he is as a football player, but who he is as a person, who he is as a man. And I'm really excited to see what he's going to put together, because I think guys like him, they get rewarded. And I'm excited to see what that reward looks like.
Yeah, this is why you look for these types of players. This is what you're searching for when you go out and get guys from the high school level, when you're getting guys even out of the transfer portal in this era, is you're looking for guys that are attached not only to the money, not only to the system that they're going to be in, but to the school. That's what you're really looking for, is guys that are the complete package and really want to be involved in the community, that really want to be involved in everything that's going on campus, and embrace nicknames like Mr. Carolina. Don't look at it as something that's just a joke from teammates, but say, hey, yeah, I really do support this school, and this is a place that I want to be. I hope that you have more guys like that on this year's roster than you did a year ago, because it felt like a lot of the guys that were here a year ago were here because they got an opportunity to play for Bill Belichick, was because they got an opportunity because of the money that they were given, not because they wanted to be Carolina guys. And I think that's very important for any sport at Carolina, but especially a sport where there is so much camaraderie and trust that goes into it. So hopefully we'll see a lot more guys, express that type of notion this offseason when they get to speak on the stand in Chapel Hill. last one I wanted to get to, because I wanted to have at least one clip from each one of the guys. Man of fewer words than the other two guys that were there yesterday. But Milcard Abujide talking about where he has to improve this upcoming season.
Milcard, you are the leading sack man in terms of returners in the ACC, and you were between Akeem Mesidor and Ruben Bain, two guys that were drafted very highly next year. What do you think you have to do to continue that production and secure yourself a draft pick amongst that pantheon of ACC pass rushers?
Just be more consistent. Play my game, but play it consistently. Play on every snap. And also just, play with my teammates and just, that's it.
So, yeah, Milcard, that's the thing. He's not – I like it. Not a guy that wants to do a lot of talking, really just wants to prove things on the field. But I do think he is a good leader. He's a good leader by example, and you need some of those guys on the roster as well. Think he spoke to it right there, and that was something we're getting ready to preview the defensive line. That'll be the next position preview that we do. And, just giving you a little look into what we'll talk about with Milcard. Consistency, I think, is the one thing that you're looking for. 7 sacks in 3 games, 3 sacks in the other 9 games that the team played. I think that's the biggest thing for him moving forward this year, but I trust that he's a guy that's going to be more consistent.
Yeah, he's talked about how much stronger he is, how his body is in a much better shape than it was a year ago. That'll give him a chance, because I do think there were times during the season where maybe he did get worn down, and it was just the nature of how many snaps that he played. You want the double-digit sack total. Like, if that's going to show back up, great. And if he's going to have 7 sacks across 3 games, we're obviously not going to complain about that. But you can't have 3 sacks in the other 9. Like, you would want that. You want the sack distribution to be a lot more even, where, maybe it's 1 sack here, 2 sacks there. Once, you want it to be, if you're looking in the stat column, he's registering at least a half a sack, if not a full sack, in every single game across those 12 games. And as opposed to really just coming in bunches. Regardless, you're going to take the production, but for someone that's going to look to solidify himself as an NFL draft prospect, that's the best way he can kind of achieve that. But an easy guy to root for. He's got a unique story. The Bagels were a big topic of discussion for him yesterday, and just how he got discovered at Delaware and how thankful he was for that program and where he is now. But he knows that he had a good season last year. He's preparing himself to have a great season this year, and I'm excited to see what that looks like.
All right, so that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast. Guys, make sure you're over to the website, heeltoughblog.com. Got more takeaways, including a takeaway that we didn't get to talk about here tonight. It's just way too late to be able to talk about some of the national opinions on where Carolina is at. But there are far less expectations around this program this year than there were a year ago. And you know what? Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's something that actually helps Carolina, as opposed to last year where there were just so many expectations for a team that wasn't prepared nearly the way that they needed to be. So go read that article over there at heeltoughblog.com. Also, we've got all the position previews that are rolling out right as we're doing the podcast edition. We put that out usually in the morning so that you guys can get prepared with that. So go read about the offensive side of the ball. We got quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, and offensive line for you guys to look at. There's also projected depth charts in there of what I think the depth chart is going to look like when they open the season against TCU. So make sure you guys go over there and check that out. We would greatly appreciate that. Any other coverage that's needed on the basketball side of things here this offseason, we'll have you covered also on the website, heeltoughblog.com. Meanwhile, when it comes to social medias, follow us at HeelToughBlog on Twitter, at HeelToughBlog on Facebook, and make sure you go over to the YouTube page and find us there. That is the best place to watch the podcast. Also, if you could, while you're over there, give us a subscription. That really helps us. That we're trying to get to 1,000 before the season starts, about 130 away. So if you guys could help us out with that, we would greatly appreciate that. And when you do that, it'll give you notifications whenever we go live, whether it's on the Heel Tough Blog podcast side of things or the Four Corners podcast side of things, which we'll still be having episodes, even though they're in full off-season mode now where there's not a whole lot of information coming out. Still some great episodes that'll be coming up for you guys here in the near future. And of course, you don't want to miss any of the position previews that we still have remaining on the football side of things. And then, of course, we'll be getting you prepared with news and notes that are coming out of fall camp, and then eventually getting you ready for the opener against TCU. But that's going to wrap it up for tonight's edition of the show. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.